Hello friends, welcome to yet another session on essay perspectives. Topic for today is lawlessness is the result of failure to cultivate a sense of self-evaluation. I repeat, lawlessness is the result of failure to cultivate a sense of self-evaluation. Okay friends, let's move on. As always friends, personal request. So my book on ethics, integrity and aptitude has been pirated. Unfortunately, pirated book is of low print quality. Request you to buy only original. Friends, before we jump into discussing the essence of this essay topic and explanations, so let us first try to conceptualize this essay as being made of various components and subcomponents. So we will introduce the topic and explain the meaning of the key terms, that is lawlessness and self-evaluation. Then we would discuss the evolution of systems, evolution of society from God fearing society to ethics abiding society to law abiding society. Then we would discuss the reasons for lack of sense of self evaluation. Then we would discuss how lack of sense of self evaluation leads to lawlessness. Then whether only lack of self evaluation leads to lawlessness or is there something else. Then we would discuss how to cultivate the sense of self evaluation. Then we would conclude. This is the snapshot of how the essay could be. Okay friends, I would like to introduce this topic through the story of a hypothetical character called Gabbar, who is the son of a rich businessman. He is crazy about bikes and he has the passion for drag racing. During one of the races, he sees the board aside the road specifying the speed limit. After seeing the board, he smiles and accelerates more. Okay, by writing like this, then you can very well write later stating that as we are all aware, thoughts lead to actions. That means actions are determined by thoughts. So, the mere act of Gabbar increasing the speed of his automobile despite seeing speed limit sign or despite seeing a warning sign stating that speed thrills but kills, then what is that thing that makes him, motivates him to accelerate more? Because the only reason is his thought that accelerating more is right. In his view, in his evaluation, overspeeding is correct. It is not wrong. Thus, here the lawlessness of breaching the speed limit prescribed by a law or a rule is because of or is the result of lack of sense of self evaluation of right and wrong being cultivated in Gabbar. Hope by writing like this you can broach the topic, introduce the topic. Then as always you have to explain the meaning of key terms. So first one is lawlessness. What is lawlessness? Lawlessness basically means disregard for the provision of law by public. If everybody abides law, then it is lawfulness. If everyone intends to disobey the law or violate the law, it is lawlessness. Okay? Then what is self-evaluation? Self-evaluation means innate ability of every individual to evaluate, to judge whether an action is right or wrong, correct or incorrect. Okay, so these are the broad meanings of both the terms. Then what is the essence of this statement? Basically, for societal progress as a whole, for peaceful existence of mankind as a whole, it is important to condition human action, human behavior, human conduct. If every individual starts to conduct, starts to act in his or her own ways, in the best interests of his or her own only, then there would be chaos, there would be pandemonium, there would be disorder in the society. Thus, it becomes paramount important to condition the human conduct in a particular way. Then what is that particular way? That particular way is equal to the way which is correct, the way which would benefit everyone, the way which would not trouble anyone. Correct. So this, the way which is correct, the way which is beneficial, the way which would not hurt anybody is nothing but the right way. So an individual, whoever has this sense of right and wrong, whoever has this ability to evaluate whether an action is right, whether an action is beneficial, whether an action would not hurt the sentiments, would not hurt anybody, would not trouble anybody, then that fellow or that individual is more likely to undertake only such actions. Correct. If a person believes that some action would lead to would lead to trouble to someone, then by and large, more broadly, that person would desist from undertaking such action. Correct. This happens only when every individual has that sense of self-evaluating whether an action, conduct or behavior is right or wrong, correct or incorrect, beneficial or not, or would hurt or trouble anyone or not. Correct. So, when this sense of self-evaluation goes missing, when this sense of self-evaluation meeks, then lawlessness will arise. To put it in other words, just as we explained that it is important for every individual to evaluate whether an action, conduct or behavior is right or wrong, such actions, conducts and behaviors are prescribed in the form of provisions by laws. Thus, broadly, this conditioning of human conduct in the right way is what the codification of law all about. So, whatever a human evaluates for himself to be right is analogous to complying with provisions of law. But when that individual lacks that ability to correctly evaluate whether an action is right or wrong, then the ability of the individual to comply with the provisions of the law would also get reduced. Thus, if in the absence of that ability to evaluate an action is right or wrong, would definitely lead to disregard for the provisions of law. That would in turn lead to lawlessness. As explained in the previous slide, friends, for the peaceful existence of mankind as a whole or for societal progress as a whole, it is important for conditioning human conduct. So this there have been attempts from times immemorial for conditioning of this human conduct in different ways. In earlier days, that conditioning was attempted through the name of a supernatural force or God. Some conducts were prescribed, and anyone who would abide by that conduct, who would act in close consonance with those the tenets of those conduct, would be loved by the God Almighty. Anybody who would deviate from these prescribed tenets would unnecessarily invite the wrath, anger of the super or supreme force. Correct? But as time passed by, that fear towards God started slightly reducing. Then later came the concept of ethics, ethical principles are being prescribed by religious leaders, being prescribed by philosophers, or slowly this societal customs also started emerging. Any failure to abide by the ethical tenets prescribed by religious leaders or not to abide by the societal customs would invite the societal boycott. Correct. So thus initially the fear of God conditioned human conduct. In later times, fear of societal boycott conditioned human conduct. Correct. But in later times, after when the human beings became more and more rational, became more and more independent, became or learned to live on their own without much dependence on others, then their voluntary compliance with the ethical tenets started waning. In order to ensure that even in the absence of such voluntary compliance, that societal progress is not hampered, the society came up with a new tool called law, where some conducts or actions or behaviors are codified and formalized, and any non-compliance with those provisions would attract punitive actions. Correct. Thus, it is the fear of penalty, fear of punitive action, fear of negative sanctions that would force a person to abide by law. Correct. To ensure that he evaluates or he develops the sense of self-evaluation. But however, even then, even after prescribing punitive actions for non-compliance also, still we see lawlessness around around the society, just as in the case of Gabbar, who is representative of a modern citizen who has least respect for the provisions of law. Then if that is the case, even when punitive actions are prescribed, if a person is not able to, or if a person is not motivated to abide by the provisions of law, then that means he thinks otherwise. That means he or she thinks that the non-compliance with the provisions of the law is correct. He has his own set of evaluation which is in contrast with the provisions of law. Hope I am very clear. Anybody, every person, as already told in the introduction, every action is determined by thoughts. Every individual would definitely undertake those actions which he or she thinks is correct. Now here law is saying you please do A, B, C. But a person is thinking that doing A, B, C is not correct, doing P, Q, R is correct. Then this person's self-evaluation is saying that don't do A, B, C but do P, Q, R. Correct. So despite having the fear, despite having the punitive action, still that person is disobeying the law, disregarding the provisions of the law, leading to lawlessness. Correct. Now in the next slide, let us examine the reasons for this lack of self-evaluation in terms of law. Okay, as already explained, despite having penal actions, a person has tendency to go against it because he or she believes that going against the law is correct. That means there is the individual does not have the proper sense of self-evaluation. He has sense of some self-evaluation, but that sense of self-evaluation is not correct. Correct. Then what are the reasons for this? Reason number one. First one is superstitious beliefs. Mostly what happens, the law prescribes rational actions, which in most cases is in contrast with superstitious actions. Because superstition is never based in science, is never based or is always rooted in the advancement of selfish interest of one community or the other. Thus, a person in the grip of superstition would evaluate every action from the lens of superstition only and would not abide by the rational provisions of law, and thus would become the reason for lawlessness. The best example is sati. So the Lord William Bentinck prohibited the practice of sati. Even after the promulgation of law, many people continued to practice sati. That means many people continued to do lawlessness because their superstition said, boss, sati is only correct. So they continued with lawlessness. So one reason for lawlessness is superstition. Correct? Next comes indoctrination. What is this indoctrination? Indoctrination, as all of us know, is imparting certain principles to individuals in such a way that they accept it to be true without questioning it. Correct? That is brainwashing, to put it crudely. Okay? The best example is recruitment by terrorists and extremists, left-wing extremists and other revolutionaries, if I may say so. What they do, they would brainwash the individuals in such a way that their sense of self-evaluation, their sense of right self-evaluation gets clouded. Such an individual who is in the grip of indoctrined principles would not abide by law for sure, because abiding by law is made that person to believe that is wrong. Correct? So thus the second example is indoctrination. Indoctrination is another reason why a person's sense of self-evaluation gets clouded and why there would be lawlessness. Then the third reason is ignorance. Sometimes a person, because of his lack of understanding, lack of competence, lack of knowledge, would not know what is right and what is wrong. So the best example, illustration for this is tribals all across the country indulge in shifting cultivation. They cut off the trees, they clear the land for cultivation. It is called shifting cultivation, slash and burn cultivation, zoom cultivation, whatever we call it. So what they do, they chop off the trees, burn the wood, and they cultivate there for some time. Once that soil or land becomes less fertile, they move to another place, cut off the trees, again they do cultivation there. That means they are indulging in something called shifting cultivation because they don't know that cutting a tree is environmentally disastrous. They don't even know that cutting a tree in a forest is an offense under Forest Act. Thus, here lawlessness is because of their ignorance. They don't have the sense of self-evaluation because they are ignorant. Thus, they become the reason for lawlessness. Then the last point is selfishness. Sometimes humans act in such a way that their interests get advanced. No matter if such advancement would harm the interests of society or other individuals. The best example is tax evasion. If I evade tax, okay, I save money for myself. My interest gets served. But in the garb of promoting my interest, I am harming the societal interest. If this money is, so the taxes are paid properly, then the money so collected would be used for the development of society only. But my selfishness is clouding, masking my sense of self-evaluation, thus leading to lawlessness. Correct? So thus friends, superstition, indoctrination, ignorance and selfishness are some of the reasons that would cloud a sense of self-evaluation, thereby leading to lawlessness. Friends, once the reasons for lack of sense of correct self-evaluation is examined, now it is high time to explain or to explicitly connect how lack of sense of self-evaluation leads to lawlessness. Correct? See here, between doing what one thinks is right, whether that is correct or not is different. Between what one thinks is right and what one is expected to do according to law, the only thing that motivates a person to abide by law rather than doing whatever he or she wishes is the punitive actions loaded into non-compliance of the provisions of law. Correct. So, thus, if that fear of law, the punitive action is missing, then obviously there will be lawlessness. A person wants to do whatever he or she wants. Correct. So this is because the first and foremost thing is weak enforcement machinery. Of course, I don't abide by law because I am under superstition, I am under indoctrination, I am under ignorance, or I am under, say, selfish interest. Okay. So I don't abide by law. Then even if I don't abide by law, there is no enforcement, it's okay. If there is serious enforcement, thus somehow I am forced to come out of the cocoon of superstition, cocoon of ignorance, cocoon of indoctrination, cocoon of selfish interest. But here there is no enforcement machinery, then it's okay. Thus weak enforcement machinery is the first and foremost thing that would lead lack of sense of self-evaluation to lawlessness. Second one is uncertain punitive action. See, what makes Gabbar to overspeed despite saying speed limit? Because he has never heard of anyone being punished for overspeeding. So thus, the punitive action is uncertain. If the punitive action is certain that, okay, if I don't comply, I will definitely be hanged, then everybody would comply. If that punitive action is uncertain, then I do whatever I want. So that is the reason. Then, of course, ignorance of law, as I have already explained, I need not have to elaborate it further. Then, the negative impact on others. See, so many of the prescriptions of law are meant to reduce the harmful effect to others or to reduce the trouble to others. See, I'll give you a very simple example. We are going on a street, we are eating a banana, and a person throws skin of the banana just onto the street and just walks away. Because he is sure that he would not walk in that road. Anyway, someone else will walk and someone else may step on that skin of banana and may fall. This fellow will not fall, right? Thus, many of the actions intended by law are meant to prevent harm to others, not to this person directly. Thus, if a person has a strong sense of self-evaluation, he would think my actions should not just prevent me from trouble. It should not afflict any trouble to anybody. This would be the attitude of a person who has strong sense of self-evaluation. But a person who doesn't have this strong sense of self-evaluation would not care if some harm befalls on someone else, not on him or herself. So thus, this lack of sense of self-evaluation leads to lawlessness. Then the last one is that there is no visible positive impact of lawfulness. So many times what we do, if we abide by certain course of action, then there is no direct benefit to us. If there is direct benefit to a person who indulges in that action, then that person has more motivation to abide by it. Since there is no tangible benefit to him or herself, then a person thinks it is okay to violate law. So only a person with strong sense of self-evaluation would abide by an action, even if that means that action would not bring any visible positive impact to him or her. So when that sense of self-evaluation is missing, this person thinks it is okay to violate law, thereby leading to lawlessness. Then friends, once you have explained all these things, it is important for us to give an analytical touch to the topic altogether. See, hitherto we have explained that lack of sense of self-evaluation would lead to lawlessness. Correct? Always, if there is no sense of self-evaluation, it leads to lawlessness has been our constant argument. Then it becomes important for us to fetch more marks, to stop a bit, to pause a bit and question ourselves. Is lack of sense of self-evaluation the only reason for lawlessness? No, right? Friends, I feel I want to give an altogether different dimension to you. Sometimes a strong sense of self-evaluation would also lead to lawlessness. Array, you may wonder, right? Hitherto we have said lack of sense of self-evaluation leads to lawlessness. But here I am saying that in some circumstances, strong sense of self-evaluation would also lead to lawlessness. How? Simple, friends. Take the example of civil disobedience movement. Correct. When the law itself is rooted in unethical principles, when the law itself is promulgated to promote the selfish interests of only one section of the community at the cost of other sections of the community, then obviously every person would feel that, would get that strong sense that abiding by that law is wrong. Then that strong sense of self-evaluation would also lead to lawlessness. The best example is civil disobedience movement. What is civil disobedience movement, my friends? What call did Gandhiji give to every Indian at that point of time during salt satyagraha? To break the law of salt. Until then, only government could prepare salt. But Gandhiji said, let us violate that law. Let us break that law. Imposition of salt tax is the most inhuman action that any government can think of. Thus, Gandhiji's idea was that the principle of law which imposed tax on the salt itself is rooted in unethical principles, itself intended to promote the interest of British at the cost of Indian interests. So thus Gandhiji said, let us break law, let there be lawlessness. So thus friends, this is one example. Then Jasmine Revolution, then all the revolutions that we have witnessed against autocratic regimes across the world is because that the strong sense of self-evaluation, that the provision of the laws are unethical, that strong sense of self-evaluation motivated people to break law. Thus, sometimes even the presence of strong sense of self-evaluation would lead to lawlessness. Friends, it becomes aptly clear that the need for sense of right self-evaluation. By right self-evaluation, I mean ability to evaluate whether an action is ethical or not, regardless of whether it is legal or not. That sense is very important. If the law itself is legal, that sense of right evaluation, if that law itself is ethical, then the sense of right self-evaluation would promote compliance with law, that is lawfulness. If the law itself is unethical, then this sense of right evaluation, the sense of right self-evaluation would correct the law itself. Correct? So thus it is important to cultivate the sense of right self-evaluation regardless of whether that action is legal or not. Okay? So how is this sense cultivated? Friends, it's always the same thing, by family. This I need not have to explain. This is the same thing which you have to say for whatever personality related things or personality development related things. So parents have to develop or have to cultivate or to inculcate that sense of right self-evaluation in the children by being role models. The grandparents have to inculcate that sense through bedtime stories. Education also through moral education, through incorporating such tenets in the regular curriculum, through role plays, through involving students in social service activities, through NCC, NSS, Scouts, Guides, community organizations, etc., etc. thus the educational institutions also have the responsibility, or they can cultivate this sense of right self-evaluation amongst children. That would lead to more and more law-abiding citizens. Then friends, it is time for conclusion. What would you conclude? Simple. From the above discussion, it becomes amply clear that a person would abide by law or would correct an unethical law if and only if that person has strong sense of right self-evaluation. That right sense of self-evaluation is not need not be in birth. It can be very well cultivated or inculcated through by families and also by educational institutions. If such cultivation of right sense of right self-evaluation happens, then the society would have less of gabbers but more of law-abiding virus or jais. So taking reference to Sholay, I was just in the lighter note, I was just giving reference to the movie. But whatever, this is how you can conclude, friends. So, friends, having said this, before I close, just want to indicate one thing to you, friends. Some of you in comments you have asked whether it is mandatory to start everything with Gandhiji or so, but nothing of that sort, friends. See, I am a person who wants to give examples, who wants to give illustrations to you which are known to every serious aspirant. Because then only you will get that sense of gleaning from your understanding and your already existing knowledge the requisite examples, requisite illustrations to be peppered into your essays. I don't want any aspirant to run behind anecdotes, to run behind the lives of biographies and autobiographies of great personalities, or run behind quotes just for the sake of essays. That is not at all necessary, friends. Whatever you already know, you should have the smartness to draw those examples. You may have seen in my entire all the video lectures on essay perspectives, in almost at least I can say 85 to 90% of the examples and illustrations that I have given to all of you is known to most of us. Okay, so thus there is no hard and fast rule as to everything has to be started from Gandhiji or not. No, nothing like that. Whatever you already know, you just use those examples. Be smart enough to mold those examples to suit the requirement of essay topic, friends. Anyway, having said that, I sign off. Thank you so much for your patient listening. All the best. Happy reading.